Lonely rancher found an Apache warrior girl caged at auction for $5 and gave her his ranch and name. John McAllister rode slowly across the vast sun-baked plains of Arizona. The wind tugged at the wide brim of his hat, carrying with it the dry scent of sagebrush and dust. His horse, a sturdy bay named Rust, moved steadily beneath him, familiar with the lonely trails that John had traveled for years. The ranch, far behind him now, felt more like a prison than a home at times. After his wife had passed 5 years ago, the sprawling property that had once been alive with laughter, conversation, and the bustling of ranch hands had become eerily quiet. Even the cattle seemed to sense the emptiness. John had grown accustomed to solitude, but there were nights when the loneliness pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. He adjusted the reins, his fingers rough and calloused from decades of hard work. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a mix of browns and muted greens, broken occasionally by the silhouette of distant mountains. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and John knew he had to reach the town by midday. Supplies were running low: flour, coffee, and a few essentials for the ranch, and it had been weeks since he had last sold a herd of cattle. But beyond practical needs, there was something in John that craved the rare human interaction that town life offered. A nod from a store clerk, a few words exchanged with another rancher, the faint sense of community he had once known. Those moments were small, but they reminded him of the world beyond the fence lines of his ranch. As he rode, he noticed a cloud of dust rising in the distance. At first he thought it was a dust storm, but as he drew closer, he saw wagons and people, all moving with an unusual energy. A banner of tattered cloth flapped from a pole, announcing an auction of goods and livestock. John had seen auctions before, usually in the larger towns, but this one seemed small, makeshift, and hastily organized. Curiosity tugged at him, something he had not felt in a long time. He nudged Rust forward, and the horse trotted toward the gathering. The crowd was rough, a mixture of traders, cowhands, and a few townsfolk who had traveled out to see the spectacle. The sun glinted off their hats and the metal of the wagons. There was a loud, booming voice calling out items for sale: bags of grain, sacks of tools, a few horses, and even a few chickens. John's eye scanned the crowd as he tried to place himself on the outskirts, wary of drawing too much attention. He wasn't used to crowds anymore. They made him uneasy, the chatter and bargaining unfamiliar and almost alien to his long years of solitude. Then something caught his eye, something he had not expected. Off to the side, almost hidden behind a stack of crates, was a small cage. Inside, a young girl sat, her hands bound and her dark eyes alert, scanning the crowd with suspicion. Her hair was black and glossy, braided carefully down her back. Her skin was sun-kissed and weathered beyond her years, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that immediately drew John's attention. There was a tension in her shoulders, a fire in her eyes, that made him pause. She was not like the livestock or the tools that surrounded her. She was human, alive, and she was being treated like a commodity. The auctioneer's voice rang out again, calling for bids. Next item for sale: a fine young girl, strong and healthy, can do work on any ranch or farm. Who'll start the bidding? The words made John's stomach tighten. He had expected to see animals or goods, but not this. The crowd murmured and laughed, some making crude jokes. John's hand tightened on the reins. He had seen cruelty before, in the rough lives of ranchers and traders, but this struck him differently. There was something about the girl's presence, something stubborn and defiant, that made him feel a sudden sharp protectiveness. He dismounted and walked closer, careful to keep his expression neutral. He could hear some of the men whispering, discussing how little it would take to own her. $5, $10. John's mind went to his finances, to the practical concerns of the ranch, and then he stopped himself. He shook his head slightly. This was not about money. This was about what was right. The girl's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment it felt as if she could see into him, reading his thoughts, gauging whether he was friend or foe. John held her gaze, refusing to look away. The bidding began slowly, with a few men calling out low amounts. The girl shifted slightly in her cage, her expression one of wary calculation. John noticed the muscles in her arms, the way she held herself as if ready to leap at any moment. She was strong, capable, and intelligent, not a helpless child as the auctioneer had implied. As the bidding crept up to $5, John surprised even himself by raising his hand. "As to the capital." $5, he said, his voice steady, carrying over the crowd. There was a brief pause. A few men laughed, clearly expecting someone else to take over, but no one did. The auctioneer looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Do I hear 6?" he barked. No one moved. John's jaw tightened. "Sold," the auctioneer finally declared, and the crowd murmured in surprise. John stepped forward, reaching for the cage. The girl's eyes narrowed. She did not speak, did not flinch. She merely studied him, as if trying to decide whether he was a new danger or a potential savior. John felt an odd mixture of fear and determination. He had never owned a person before, and yet, at this moment, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. He led her away from the auction, moving carefully through the crowd. Some of the men called out crude remarks, but John ignored them, focusing on the girl. She did not speak, her lips pressed together in a line, but her eyes followed every movement he made. He could see her muscles tense, ready for resistance. And yet, she did not struggle. Perhaps she recognized that resistance would be futile, or perhaps she was simply sizing him up, waiting for a moment to act. Either way, John felt a flicker of hope. She was strong, and she was alert. She would not be easy to break, and maybe in time, she would not need to be. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. John and the girl, whose name he still did not know, moved through the plains with only the sound of Rust's hooves and the wind in their ears. John thought about his wife, about the loneliness that had defined the last few years of his life. He thought about the responsibilities of the ranch, the long days, and the endless work. But more than that, he thought about the unexpected sense of purpose he felt in protecting this girl. It was a strange feeling, one that was both frightening and exhilarating. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John guided Rust up the final hill that overlooked the ranch. The buildings lay quiet in the fading light, the fences casting long shadows over the dusty ground. The girl watched silently, her expression unreadable. John dismounted and led Rust toward the barn, keeping a careful eye on her. He had no idea how she would adjust to life on the ranch, to the routines and the isolation, but he knew one thing. He could not allow her to be sold again, could not let her return to the cruelty she had just escaped. For the first time in many years, John felt a glimmer of something he had thought lost. Hope. Not just for himself, but for another human being. The vast empty plains that had always felt lonely and oppressive now seemed full of possibility. And in that moment, standing in the fading light with a girl he barely knew, John McAllister made a silent promise to protect her, no matter the cost. John led the girl carefully through the crowded town, keeping Rust close to his side. The people around them stared, some whispering, others pointing. A few young men smirked, perhaps expecting a show of fear or weakness. But the girl, whose dark eyes glimmered with intelligence and caution, remained silent and unflinching. She carried herself like a warrior, tense but alert, as though she were calculating every step of the way. John kept glancing at her, noticing small details, the strength in her arms, the steady way she balanced herself in the saddle, the sharpness in her gaze. He did not know her name yet, and she did not offer it, but he felt a strange connection, as if destiny had guided him to this moment. The auction itself was held in a small, dusty clearing, surrounded by makeshift stalls and wagons. The auctioneer, a tall man with a booming voice and a permanent scowl, was already calling out items, pounding a wooden gavel to attract attention. Livestock, tools, and household goods were being sold one after another. John dismounted Rust and tied him to a post, keeping one eye on the girl. He could feel the tension in her body. She shifted slightly, eyes flicking from one person to another, reading the crowd. "She's next," the auctioneer shouted. A fine young girl, strong, healthy, can work on any farm or ranch. Who'll start the bidding? His words hung in the air, strange and uncomfortable, as the crowd murmured in response. John could feel a tightness in his chest. He had expected livestock or tools, maybe a few old wagons, but this was different. This was a human being treated like property. He looked at the girl again. She did not plead or look afraid, but her expression was wary, alert, and defiant all at once. The bidding began slowly. One man called out $1, another $2. Some laughed, thinking it would be easy to get her for next to nothing. John's hand remained at his side. He had no intention of competing unless he had to. Yet he could not let her remain in that cage. He knew in that moment that he would pay whatever it took, even if it strained his finances. This was not about money. This was about doing what was right. He raised his hand. $5, he said, his voice calm but firm. A hush fell over the crowd. Some of the men laughed, thinking he would be outbid easily, but no one raised their hand. The auctioneer looked surprised, peering at John over his glasses. "Do I hear 6?" he barked. Again, no response. Finally, he nodded. "Sold!" he said, slamming the gavel down. John felt a surge of responsibility wash over him. The girl's eyes met his. She did not smile or nod. Instead, she watched him, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. John felt an odd connection in that silent exchange. He did not know if she understood the concept of being bought, as he had just done, but he hoped she could sense his intentions. Carefully, he approached the cage and unlocked it, motioning for her to step out. She hesitated, eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for an escape. John did not make a move to force her. He simply waited. Finally, with a cautious step, she climbed out. She kept her distance, but allowed herself to be near him. Her movements were precise, controlled, like a trained fighter or someone used to survival in harsh conditions. John could not help but admire her strength and resilience. He extended a hand in a gesture of trust, though he was not sure she would accept it. She did not take it, but she did not retreat either. It was a small victory, a first sign that perhaps she could be reasoned with. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The girl remained alert, occasionally glancing over her shoulder as if anticipating danger. John did not try to fill the silence with words. Instead, he focused on guiding Rust through the uneven terrain, keeping his mind alert to both the landscape and the girl beside him. He knew she had been through experiences he could barely imagine, and he wanted to give her the space to adjust. At the same time, he could feel a protective instinct growing within him, one that was both unfamiliar and powerful. As the sun began to dip low, casting golden light over the plains, John led Rust up the hill that overlooked his ranch. The buildings lay quiet in the fading light, the fences casting long shadows over the dusty ground. The girl followed at a careful distance, still watching him, still cautious. John dismounted and led Rust to the barn. He turned to her. "You'll be safe here," he said simply. His voice was low but steady, carrying a weight of sincerity he hoped she could sense. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she surveyed the ranch with careful eyes, taking in the barn, the fenced pasture, and the distant hills. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the words. "Why did you buy me?" Her accent was unfamiliar, her words clipped but clear. John looked at her, unsure how to explain something so simple yet so profound.
"I saw you there," he said finally.
"Then I knew you didn't belong in that cage. You deserve better." That's all. He waited for her reaction. She studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded slightly. It was not acceptance or gratitude. It was acknowledgement. It was enough for now. Life on the ranch began quietly. The girl whom John learned was named Nahale proved to be strong and capable. She moved with grace among the cattle, learning quickly, observing everything with sharp intelligence. At first, she kept her distance, wary of forming any connection. John did not force her. He understood the value of patience. Over time, he began to see glimpses of her personality, her quiet humor, her quick thinking, her surprising adaptability. John, too, began to change. His loneliness, which had once seemed permanent, started to lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. Caring for Nahele was not easy. There were moments of tension, of misunderstanding, of silent standoffs. But each challenge brought them closer, not as master and servant, but as two people navigating an unfamiliar world together. John realized that for the first time in years, he was not alone in his struggles. Neighbors and ranch hands were wary at first. They whispered about the Apache girl living at McAllister's ranch, some expressing skepticism, others open hostility. John did not care. He had made a choice, and he would stand by it no matter the consequences. Nahel, sensing the tension, adapted quickly, showing skill with horses and cattle that earned respect from even the most doubtful men. Slowly, trust began to grow. Not complete trust, but enough to build the foundation for something stronger. Evenings at the ranch were quiet but comforting. John and Nahela would sit by the fire after a long day of work, listening to the wind sweep across the plains. Sometimes she would speak, asking questions about the ranch, the cattle, or the surrounding lands. Sometimes she would remain silent, lost in her own thoughts. John learned to respect her silence, understanding that it was part of her process of healing and adjustment. John often thought of his wife during these moments. He remembered the laughter they had shared, the long talks by the fire, and the warmth of her presence. Now, with Naheli beside him, he felt a different kind of warmth, a sense of connection that transcended words. She was fierce, independent, and resilient, yet she allowed him to be part of her world, even if only in small ways. It was a quiet bond, but a powerful one. Days turned into weeks, and Nahel began to take more initiative. She learned to handle the horses, to tend the cattle, and to manage small tasks around the ranch. John watched her with pride and admiration, realizing that he had not only rescued her from the auction, but had also gained a partner in life. Their bond was growing slowly, built on respect, trust, and shared experiences. John knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that they had each other, and that was more than enough to face whatever came their way. The auction had been a turning point, a moment that changed both of their lives forever. And in that change, John found a sense of purpose and companionship he had not felt in years. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, but it was far from easy. The wide, sun-baked plains stretched endlessly in every direction, and every day brought new tasks and challenges. John McAllister rose before dawn, as he always had, moving quietly through the barn to check on the cattle and horses. Nahel was already awake by the time he emerged from the house. She had been studying the horses, observing their behavior, and carefully noting which ones were calm and which ones needed attention. John watched her from the doorway, noticing the way her hands moved, steady and confident, as she adjusted saddles and brushed coats. She was learning fast, but more than that, she was beginning to care, not just for herself, but for the animals and the ranch that had become her new home. At first she kept her distance from John, speaking only when necessary and carefully choosing her words. Her silence was not coldness, it was caution. She had learned to survive in a harsh world, and trust did not come easily. John respected that. He had learned, over years of isolation, that patience often mattered more than force or persuasion. Slowly, he began teaching her the practical work of ranching: how to mend fences, how to guide a stubborn steer into a pen, and how to ride the horses with confidence. Nahele surprised him at every turn, picking up techniques quickly and even improving upon some of his methods. Her instincts were sharp, and her strength was remarkable. By mid-morning, the ranch began to stir with activity. John's small team of ranch hands arrived, a mix of men who had worked for him for years, and a few newer hires. Some were wary of Nahel at first, uncertain what to make of the Apache girl living on the ranch. Whispers followed her as she moved through the barn or tended the horses. John noticed but did not intervene directly. He allowed her to earn respect through her actions rather than words. She did not speak much to the men at first, but when she did, it was precise and confident. Soon they began to see her skill and determination. and their attitudes shifted from suspicion to cautious admiration. Even with her growing competence, there were challenges. The ranch was large, with rolling pastures and rugged terrain, and there was always work to be done. Nahel had never experienced life so removed from the crowd, yet she adapted. She learned to wake before sunrise to feed the cattle, to carry water across the fields, and to repair fences in the blazing heat. Her body grew stronger, her hands calloused like John's, and her confidence grew alongside her skill. John watched her progress with quiet pride, seeing not just a capable worker but a resilient young woman who had survived far more than he could imagine. The evenings were the hardest, though. The ranch was quiet then, the sounds of the day giving way to the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Nahel often sat near the fire, sometimes speaking softly about her past, though she never revealed much. John listened, offering simple reassurances rather than probing questions. He knew that trust could not be rushed. He also shared stories of his own past, about his wife, about the ranch, about the long years of solitude. They were simple stories, yet they formed the beginning of a bond between them. Slowly, Nahela began to relax, laughing quietly at his dry humor or offering her own observations about the animals in the land. But life on the ranch was not without conflict. Rumors of Nahel's presence spread to nearby settlements. Some townsfolk were curious, others skeptical, and a few expressed hostility. "Why would a rancher take in an Apache girl?" they whispered. "Isn't that dangerous?" John ignored most of the gossip, but he noticed a few men linger near the fence lines, watching. Nahel noticed too, her eyes sharp and alert. One evening, after a long day of work, she approached John. "They do not understand," she said quietly. "Some will come, some may try. You must be ready." John nodded, appreciating her caution. He had always been careful, but now with Nahela by his side, he felt a renewed responsibility, not just for her, but for the safety of the ranch as a whole. One afternoon, a small group of men arrived at the ranch claiming to be traders or travelers. They seemed friendly at first, but their questions quickly turned probing, asking about Nahel and her presence on the property. John could see the unease in her eyes, and he stepped forward firmly. "She stays," he said simply. "And she is part of this ranch? That is all you need to know." The men grumbled but eventually left, sensing the firmness in John's voice. Nahel watched him with a new respect that day. She had learned that while he was patient, he was also unwavering when it came to protecting those he cared about. As the months passed, the bond between John and Nahel deepened. They shared small routines, feeding the horses, repairing fences, checking the cattle, and these tasks became opportunities for learning and trust. Nahel began teaching John some of the survival skills she had learned from her Apache heritage: how to track animals, how to find clean water in the harsh terrain, and how to move silently across the plains. John listened and absorbed the lessons, impressed by her knowledge and resourcefulness. In return, he continued teaching her the skills of ranching, blending practical experience with her natural abilities. There were moments of quiet reflection as well. One evening, John and Nahel climbed a small hill to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and sage. Nahele spoke softly about the land, about the connection she felt to it, and John listened, realizing that they both found solace in the same vast open spaces.
It was in these moments, away from work in the eyes of others, that their trust and respect for each other grew the strongest Hepdown Valley.
Nahel also began to form tentative connections with the ranch hands. Her skills with the horses and her courage when dealing with difficult cattle earned their admiration. Over time, their initial skepticism faded, replaced by respect. Some even sought her advice on handling animals or navigating the rough terrain. John observed these interactions with a sense of quiet satisfaction, seeing her not just as someone he had saved, but as a valuable part of the ranch community. Despite the progress, there were setbacks. A sudden storm once threatened to flood the lower pastures, and John and Nahel worked side by side through pouring rain to save the cattle and secure the property. Mud and water soaked through their clothes, and exhaustion weighed heavily on them. But they persevered. The shared struggle strengthened their bond, demonstrating that they could rely on each other in times of hardship. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact, and they were both covered in mud and bruises, yet smiling at the accomplishment. Over time, John noticed subtle changes in Nahel. She began to take initiative, making decisions about the care of the animals and the organization of the ranch without needing instruction. Her confidence grew, and she began to speak more freely, sharing her observations and ideas. John welcomed this, recognizing that she was no longer just a guest on the ranch, but an equal partner in its care and operation. Their evenings together became a time of shared reflection and quiet joy. They would sit by the fire after a long day, the flames casting warm light across their faces. John would talk about his past, about the life he had built on the ranch, and Naheli would share her thoughts about the land, the animals, and her experiences. Slowly, laughter began to fill the spaces between them, soft and genuine, a sound that had been absent from the ranch for many years. As the seasons changed, John and Nahel adapted together. The harsh summers and cold winters tested their resilience, but they faced each challenge with determination. The ranch became more than a place of work. It became a home, a sanctuary where trust and respect flourished. Nahel, once wary and cautious, began to feel a sense of belonging. She learned the rhythms of the land, the ways of the animals, and the routines of ranch life. In return, she shared her knowledge, her courage, and her unyielding spirit, enriching John's life in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the year, it was clear that the ranch had changed, not just in its operation, but in its heart. John, once a lonely and isolated man, had found companionship and purpose. Nahel, once a captive and stranger, had found safety, respect, and a place to call home. Their bond, forged through shared labor, mutual respect, and quiet moments of understanding, had grown strong and resilient. And while the challenges of life on the plains were far from over, John knew that with Naheli by his side, they could face whatever came their way. Together they had built more than a ranch. They had built a foundation of trust, loyalty, and companionship that would carry them into the future, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. As the months passed, John McAllister realized that Nahela was no longer just someone he had rescued. She had become an essential part of his life, and the ranch itself. Her confidence had grown immensely, and her skill with the animals and the land had earned her not only his admiration, but also the respect of the ranch hands. Where once she had been cautious and wary, now she moved with purpose and authority, guiding the cattle, checking fences, and tending the horses with precision. Yet despite her growing ease, there remained a quiet pride in her independence. She was strong, intelligent, and unyielding, yet she had allowed John to become part of her life. John, too, had changed. The solitude that had defined him for so many years was no longer a heavy weight upon his shoulders. The ranch felt alive again, not just with the movements of the cattle or the rustle of the wind through the plains, but with shared effort and companionship. He found joy in the little things, hearing Nahele's laughter as she raced across the pastures, sharing stories by the fire at night, and feeling the quiet comfort of her presence nearby. He had expected to rescue a girl from danger, but in truth, she had rescued him from years of isolation and loneliness. One morning after a particularly harsh winter that had tested both their endurance and the resilience of the ranch, John called Nahel to the front porch. The sun was rising, casting soft golden light across the snow-dusted fields. John leaned on the railing, watching as Nahel approached, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her eyes alert and determined. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride knowing that she had not only survived the past months, but had thrived, growing stronger with each challenge. "Nahel," John said, his voice steady but gentle, "I want you to know something important." She tilted her head, curious but cautious. John continued, "You've earned your place here, not because of anything I did, but because of who you are. Strong, capable, and brave. You belong here, with this land and with these people." Naheli's eyes softened slightly, the hint of a smile forming on her lips, but she remained silent, as though absorbing the weight of his words.
John took a deep breath. "I want you to have more than just a place to live.
I want you to have a name, a home, and the right to protect this ranch as you see fit. I want you to have my name, McAllister. From now on, you are Nahale McAllister, and this ranch is yours as much as it is mine." For a long moment, Nahale said nothing. She looked out over the fields, the horses grazing peacefully, the fences standing firm, and then back at John. Her dark eyes glistened, reflecting both surprise and emotion. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but soft. "Thank you," she said simply. I will honor it." The words were few, but they carried a depth of meaning that went far beyond simple gratitude. The act of giving her his name was more than a gesture. It symbolized trust, recognition, and equality. John had always been a man of few words, but this decision reflected the growth of his heart. By formally giving Nahale his name, he was affirming her place in the world, giving her protection, and declaring that she was not just a guest or a worker, but family. The following weeks were filled with preparations for a small ceremony, not one of grandeur, but one of significance. John invited the ranch hands and a few trusted neighbors who had shown respect for Nahale's skills and courage. They gathered at the ranch one crisp morning, the sun rising over the plains, painting everything in warm light. John and Nahale stood together before the group, side by side, a symbol of unity and mutual respect. John spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "This land has been my home for many years. But it is not the land alone that gives life to a ranch. It is the people who work it, care for it, and respect it. Today I am proud to give this ranch and my name to Nahale, who has proven herself to be strong, wise, and worthy of this trust." Nahale stepped forward, her head held high, her eyes meeting those of everyone present. "I accept this responsibility," she said. "I will protect this land, these animals, and this home as if it were my own from the start. I am grateful for the trust and guidance I have received, and I will honor it always." Her words carried the confidence of someone who had survived hardship and emerged stronger, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the importance of loyalty. The ranch hands nodded, some clapping quietly, others offering respectful smiles. There were no grand celebrations, no extravagant feasts, just the quiet acknowledgement of a new beginning. The ceremony was simple, yet it marked a turning point in both their lives. Nahale was no longer a girl who had been rescued from an auction. She was a member of the McAllister family, with rights, respect, and a place in the world. Over the following months, life continued at the ranch, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. Nahale embraced her new name and role with quiet confidence. She made decisions about the care of the animals, the planting of crops, and the management of the property. Her suggestions were thoughtful and practical, often improving upon methods that John had used for years. He observed her leadership with pride, knowing that she was not only capable but also wise beyond her years. John also found that he had grown as a man. His patience had deepened, his understanding of people expanded, and his capacity for empathy had grown in ways he had never expected. He learned from Nahale as much as she learned from him. Together they navigated the challenges of ranch life, the unpredictable weather, the health of the livestock, and occasional disputes with neighbors. With cooperation and trust, the ranch thrived under their joint care, a testament to their combined strength and determination. The bond between them grew deeper with each passing day. Evenings by the fire became a cherished ritual. They would speak of the past, share observations about the land, and sometimes simply sit in companionable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast desert sky. In these moments, the loneliness that had once defined John's life vanished completely. He realized that family was not just about blood or tradition. It was about trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. Nahale, too, found a sense of peace she had never known. The terror and uncertainty of her early years, the fear that had followed her since she was a child, gradually faded. She had a home, a family, and a place where her skills and courage were valued. The ranch became a sanctuary not just of safety, but of growth, learning, and hope. She felt a connection to the land and the animals that was deeper than anything she had experienced before, and she carried that connection into every task she undertook. Life on the ranch continued to be challenging, of course. The seasons brought harsh summers, icy winters, and unexpected storms. Each challenge tested their endurance and skill. But with John and Nahale working together, the ranch endured. The cattle thrived, the crops flourished, and the property grew stronger under their care. Their partnership had become seamless, a blend of experience, intuition, and mutual respect that guided every decision they made. As the years went by, John and Nahale's story became known throughout the nearby towns. They were admired not for wealth or grandeur, but for the strength of their character, their fairness, and the loyalty they showed to one another. Travelers and neighbors spoke of the Apache girl who had become part of the McAllister family, earning respect for her bravery, skill, and wisdom. John took no pride in the attention. He was content in the knowledge that Nahale had found her place in the world, and that together they had built something lasting and meaningful. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, John and Nahale stood on the hill overlooking the ranch. The cattle grazed quietly, the horses shifted in the fading light, and the wind carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and dry earth. John looked at Nahale, her face calm and confident, and felt a surge of gratitude and admiration. "We've done well," he said softly. Nahale nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "Yes," she replied. "Together we have built something strong. This land, this ranch, it is ours, and it is good." Her voice was steady, filled with pride and contentment. John smiled. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of completeness. He had faced loneliness, hardship, and uncertainty, but he had also found trust, loyalty, and family in the most unexpected of ways. Nahale, once a captive, had become a partner, a guardian, and a daughter of the land, and together they had created not just a ranch, but a home, a place of safety, respect, and enduring hope. In the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to appear above the desert plains, John and Nahale stood side by side, looking over the land they had nurtured and protected. They knew challenges would come, as they always did, but they also knew that together they could face anything. The McAllister Ranch had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of trust. And in that bond, John and Nahale had found something far greater than land, livestock, or money. They had found family.